based on monthly input costs. And so we'll allow the businesses to enter their input costs, such as rent, taxes, and utilities. And we will actually calculate 2 months worth of input cost. And then whichever is the higher number of those two, either the payroll-based cost or the input-based cost, will be the base grant amount. One of our other priorities was to make sure that this is based on losses due to this COVID-19 emergency and the related shutdowns. So we do have a graduated scale based on the business's status during our stay-home order, which was in effect for just over the last month. So if a business was completely closed, they would be eligible for 100% of their calculated grant amount. If they were partially closed but partially open, they would be eligible for 75%. And we do recognize that even those businesses that were fully open suffered economic hardship as part of this crisis. And so those businesses will be eligible for 50% of their grant amount. We're trying to keep the paperwork requirements very simple. There will be an online application, fill in the blank online. We will request a few documents such as a W-9 and proof of the business existence. Those details will be posted on the website. And so again, tomorrow, starting at 5:30 p.m., that will go live and we will take applications. Those will then be reviewed by a team in our county auditor's office for compliance and to run the formula, to run the numbers. After that is done, the businesses will be notified. If a business has, for example, failed to submit one of the required documents, they won't be straight up denied. They will be contacted to ask to get the rest of the documents in. We'll work with them to get that done. And then as the auditor's office approves the grants, which will be done in the order that they're received, then that will be sent here to the treasurer's office through our check process, and we'll be sending out checks for the grants by mail. So those are the basic details. As Commissioner Covey said, this has been a very challenging time, obviously not only as a public health crisis, but truly the most challenging time we have encountered for our small businesses. So the goal of this program is to help those businesses stay afloat and keep operating as we go through this process of getting back to more normal operations. And we look forward to being able to assist with that.
Thank you, Scott. You know, one of the things that, like Scott mentioned, that we really pushed for was the most simplistic way and the fastest route to get funds out. We didn't want to have a large bureaucratic process, and so I think that the process that is set in place will achieve that. Even to because the Commissioners Court approved the details of this program, and basically under local government chapter code chapter 381, we're able to proceed with this without having to go back to Commissioners Court for each of those checks to be written. And that is key to getting these checks out. Like Scott said, our auditor's office is going to be reviewing, but also getting checks out. And I can see checks being written daily, at least at first, when the volume of applications we anticipate will be very heavy.
Okay, we have a couple of questions waiting. I believe that you covered this, Scott, but will businesses be notified if their application is declined?
Yes, businesses will be notified either of acceptance, or if it's declined, of the reason for being declined.
And then you did say, Commissioner Covey, that you were trying to get the checks out soon, but is there sort of a timeline as to when businesses could expect to see one of the checks if they're approved and granted?
So our goal is to, as I mentioned, get the checks out as soon as possible. The process is set up, as Scott mentioned. The application is submitted. There will be a response. that your application has been submitted and received, then once it's approved, and that should, if the documentation is there, it should not take very long to approve it. And then that approval goes on a list that goes straight to our accounts payable office, and those checks are run depending on the time of day, either that day or the next day. Then they would be submitted for the mail and on their way to the business. So that's the process that we have set in place, and I believe it'll be one that will achieve the goal of getting the money to the businesses as soon as possible.
Okay, for businesses such as a newspaper that remained operational but lost money because other businesses closed, do they qualify, and where do they fall in terms of eligibility?
So those businesses, as long as they meet the under 100 full-time employees qualification, will qualify. And using the example of a newspaper, that is the kind of business that we're talking about that under the orders was allowed to remain completely operational, but we do recognize that they lost income. So in those categories, that would fall under the 50% category.
Okay, and does a sole proprietor need to submit a W-9 if operating under a social security number?
Yes, we'll have a link in the application to complete a W-9, and all applicants will need to provide one. The W-9 obviously has an option to either put a employer identification number or a social security number if it's a sole.
And Connie, let me add to that. Although the application itself will not be live till 5:30 tomorrow night, on Wednesday the 6th, the information that we are discussing today, and even more details, will be available today. As Scott said, as soon as we can go live today with that, so that'll give businesses ample time to start acquiring documents and having those ready, as well as the numbers. It's basically, you're going to put two numbers in to the form, and the form will calculate the higher of those two amounts. As Scott said, the payroll related amount or the fixed cost related amount. So I just wanted to make sure that the questions that businesses may have, some of those, and hopefully all of them, will be available to them today.
Right. Can you speak a little bit more to which businesses qualify?
Sure. So any business based in Williamson County and operating in Williamson County that has 100 or fewer full-time employees will qualify, except for some specific exceptions that are required under either state or federal law or similar programs. And when you go on the website, those specific exceptions will be listed.
Great. Also, as a follow-up to the question about how soon businesses could receive a check, if someone applies tomorrow when the application opens at 5:30 p.m., can that business, if approved, expect to see a check as soon as Thursday or Friday?
I would think that Thursday or Friday might be a little ambitious as far as actually receiving the check. We will start processing those applications right away. And I anticipate that the first round of them will be approved on Thursday. That may result in a check run on Thursday or a check run on Friday. And then obviously those need to be put in the mail, at which point it's a little out of our control. Hopefully, those being Williamson County businesses, that mail would be delivered next day or within 2 days. So I think someone would certainly expect that the first round of checks will be arriving at latest by the beginning of the week, taking into account that we do expect there be a large volume of applications coming in the first couple of days. So there will be a volume to go through as well.
Okay, what kind of documentation will be needed to prove fixed expenses?
So in order to work through the process efficiently on the front end, we are not requiring documentation as part of the application, except that we do have a requirement for sole proprietor applicants to provide their Schedule C from their tax return. However, an applicant will be signing a good faith certification that the information they're providing is accurate. That'll be signed obviously under the penalty of perjury. And we do have an audit requirement or capability on the back end. There is a category, as I mentioned, there are categories of things that the grant can be spent on, and we will require that those who receive the grants provide documentation by September 30th of this year, showing that the grant money was spent on allowable expenses. And if necessary, we'll have the ability to audit both those expenses and the application process.
Connie, we are going to also require certain information just to show that that business is a viable business. For example, Secretary of State file number, your license, maybe a Texas license number, DBA, perhaps a 2018 or 19 tax return. So, Social Security number, those items will be listed in the information that we will have live today. So people will know what to upload, and it'll be a process of uploading that. For sole proprietors, either 2018 or 19 Schedule Cs. So we've tried to keep it simple, but at the same time, there are restrictions on what the money can be used for from the federal perspective. And so we want to make sure that that's clear. And as long as the monies are used for the appropriate purposes, which is what the intent was from the beginning, then the businesses won't have an issue.
Okay. Does Williamson County at this time have an estimate as to how many businesses it expects will apply for the grant? And do you anticipate having to pull staff from other departments to handle a large volume of applications?
So I believe that our auditor's office is prepared to handle the volume of applications. They've put a team together to do so. So we don't anticipate having to pull staff from anywhere else, except that my staff is prepared to print and mail checks. We do expect a large volume. I guess I would say if I made a prediction, that would only serve for me to be wrong, probably. So I don't think I'll put a number out there, but we do expect a significant volume of applications.
We hope so.
Sorry, here's another question. What happens if a business does not use the money for the intended purposes? Will that business be penalized and or will have to pay the grant money back?
So there is a certification at the bottom of the application, and it will that they sign. They will sign, and it basically certifies that not only are they giving truthful information, but that they would also use it for the right purposes. And there is a clawback, if you will, in that certification that basically addresses that as far as not being, to be found guilty of perjury and or fined or imprisoned. I mean, that's as far as it could go. But we're anticipating voluntary compliance with the rules. And we know that our businesses are hurting, and we want to get the money out to them as soon as possible. I'm sure that they will use it in the right and appropriate ways. But of course, there's always the audit aspect of any business venture, and that will be done also. As Scott mentioned, there'll be documentation that can back up what it was spent for, and it will be due by September 30th. This money for the county that we received must be spent for expenses between March and December of 2020. And so that's one of the stipulations. And so we believe that the way we've crafted the program and that the court has approved will really generate a lot of folks participating, but also be able to get money out to the businesses as soon as possible.
Okay, there are no more questions now. Do you have anything that you would like to add at the end? Oh, wait, here's one last one. Sorry. Will the application have a place for explanation/special circumstances? Example, business owners sometimes take payment as K-1 income rather than payroll.
So we don't have that in an effort to keep the application simple, and also in an effort to ensure that the evaluation of the applications is even across all of the applications. And that is why we created the two-pronged test, if you will, because we understand that a lot of businesses, particularly very small businesses, do not have significant payroll expense. So we wanted to give a secondary option to allow for a different overhead calculation so that we can keep things being evaluated evenly.
So back to the calculation of the grant, it's the higher of the payroll cost, and we detail out what to include in that. But for sole proprietors, they can use the average monthly amount of net income in 2019. So that's one aspect, and that's 1 month of that cost, compared to two times the fixed cost, as Scott mentioned before, which would include rent, lease, mortgage payments of business property, utilities, that sort of expense. And so it's an either or on that. But including in, because of the payroll issues for sole proprietors, a lot of times they don't have payroll. They just have what's left at the end of the day. They can use the net income, average monthly net income for the prior year, or for the few months perhaps in 2020 if they just started their business. We have that laid out in the information that will be available today.
Great. And then the final question, what is the deadline for the application process?
The deadline will be June 30th. Now I would anticipate, like we said, we're encouraging applications, and we are predicting a high volume of applications. So I would anticipate that waiting till June 30th might cause the funding to be strained, but the application deadline is June 30th.
Great. Thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
So Connie, there'll also be on the information at the website, a link or information about how to get your questions answered. So look for that also, because there may be some additional questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.